Hello to you all this beautiful evening and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host, Chef Andy, and of course I'm joined by a very beautiful guest on the show today. Her name is Grace Maina, who will introduce herself in a very little while. Grace?
Hi, I'm Grace. I am a lawyer and a very big food lover, and I'm glad to be on the show.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, also to mention, Grace is also a very big follower of the show, and she's also a foodie and a very passionate cook, and is why I've actually asked her to be on the set with me today, just to be able to give the show a little bit of spice, and as well she can also maybe depict a few things that she likes that she may also be able to use in her home kitchen, just as you all will do. But before we begin, I'll of course introduce the ingredients just to give you an idea of what to expect for our chips masala, which is the dish for today. Now from the very front, I've got some garam masala and some onion powder. I've also got 3 cloves of garlic and some paprika powder, 2 medium-sized onions already peeled, about a tablespoon of lemon juice, and about 2 whole pieces of some peeled fresh ginger. You're also going to require about 2 whole chilies, green or red, doesn't matter. And you'll also require a small handful of some fresh coriander. You'll also require some 2 medium-sized tomatoes, some salt for seasoning, some oil to fry with, and of course some peeled potatoes, which we'll be using to make our fries with. But before we begin, I will of course give you this chance to freshen up and unwind, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Hello viewers and welcome back to the show. If you've just tuned in, as I mentioned, I'm going to be working with Grace today. Grace is a very big blogger out there and an upcoming lawyer, but for this particular episode she's going to be my co-host, and she's also going to be taking a few tips and tricks from our set today. But before we proceed, I will of course bring you back to scratch by mentioning we have just introduced the ingredients. We are now going to proceed to begin our very simple chips masala recipe. Now, Grace, before we begin, I would like to ask, have you had chips masala in maybe the recent past?
Yes.
And what's your preference for chips masala?
Very hot. And not so dry, even without ketchup.
Okay.
Yes, so I would say I prefer mine very hot.
All right. Now, just to break your heart a little bit, we're not going to be using ketchup for our recipe. I'm going to be showing you a much healthier option. And now we're going to be working with tomatoes. We're going to be making our own sauce from scratch. Now, of course, for some of you already pretty much wondering how we are going to come up with the sauce, we are of course going to make it from scratch. And of course, as I mentioned, being that we're also trying to work on teaching our viewers some beautiful healthy tips to making the same dishes, but with a little bit of love and passion, we're also going to be avoiding any particular processed ingredients for this recipe. So for some of you also wondering if it's possible to work with the ketchup, it is also possible. I actually, over the period of time that I've been cooking, I have realized that there are people who have a little bit of a sweet tooth towards masala fries, but we're going to be making a very savory one, but I will of course make sure it is hot just as you mentioned. All right, so to begin the process, we're going to begin by chopping up some potatoes. So I'm just going to move about 3 large pieces into my bowl on the side. I don't know if you're a big fan of chopping your own fries from home.
Yes, definitely.
You're a good fan, yeah?
Yes.
Yes, then remember you can also be able to purchase pre-cut fries, but I always insist rather work with the freshest ingredients because it is also nutritious and you actually don't lose value from processed food. Now we're going to begin by chopping up our fries. So I'm going to show you a very simple technique of getting very good chopped fries.
Okay.
Now, I always start by slicing a small wedge from the side, and I just discard. So what you're going to do is this particularly becomes a base for making sure that your potato is nice and stable while slicing. And it also makes sure that you don't actually chop your fingers off while trying to get your fries right. And all you're going to do now is proceed to do the same thing for each side. So slice that as well, turn that over, slice again, turn that over. Now you're back to the top, slice again once more. Very simple, yeah?
Okay.
Now you can also proceed to trim off the edges, but I'm not going to do so because it is also very wasteful. But remember, this will particularly give you a nice, beautiful shape to your fries, more like the way you like your McDonald's or your KFC fries. I think you've seen the nice matchstick size fries.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're going for. So once you've done that and you pretty have a nice, beautiful four-sided potato, you're going to proceed to now slice that into equal slices of about 1/4 inch in thickness. As you see, it's very, very simple, yeah? Very simple. Once that is done, just proceed to reassemble your potatoes, and you see, it's actually much fun slicing them this way.
Yeah.
You always get the shape perfect every time. All right, so once you assemble them, just press them together, and you can slice once more lengthways and go for it the second time. Now, as you can be able to see from the sizes, I can take 2 random pieces and you can't really tell the difference.
Yes.
So that's one particular tip you could use to show off your fry chopping skills next time you make fries, yeah? Simple as that. And all we're going to do is proceed to do the same for the other pieces. So I'm just going to continue going round, just as we did for the first one. And also to mention, Grace, if you're thinking maybe this may go to waste, you can always alternatively even just boil this and make some mash.
Oh, okay.
So it actually also makes...
I was actually wondering what happens
Yeah,
to that.
that's actually something I realized. A lot of people will probably wonder what to do with this afterwards. Remember, you can also just throw this in the oil and maybe nibble on them while you're just burning a bit of time in the kitchen. And for some of you who may also have maybe kids running around the kitchen, maybe eager to bite onto something, you can actually throw this in the oil and just bring that sensation. And actually, I like to do it a lot myself. So what I normally do is I finish trimming those out and I throw them in the oil. And what happens is you create that appetite by making the house smell like fries already, even if you're not started cooking. So it's actually one tip that you can also use to maybe woo your guests and maybe build an appetite. You know the effect of having that aroma of fries cooking and you're ready to eat, but that little bit of waiting period really builds an appetite. So you can also do that. So it's just building a bit of anxiety as they wait. All right, so as we did for the first one, same thing. And of course, you'll be able to do this very, very simply when you have a sharp knife. Always be sure to also take very, very big precautions, especially if you're going to allow kids to help you in the kitchen to do so, because of course knives can also be very dangerous to work with. Right, so I will proceed to do the same thing all the way to the very end. And I think you can also be able to realize it does save you quite a bit of time, yeah?
Yes.
Very, very simple, as opposed to trying to figure out which side is which. And it also saves you time in not trying to figure out how to get them perfect every time. You always get it right. Right, so again, once more, 1/4 inch slices. And then reassemble them together. Just pile them on top of each other once more. You may actually encounter instances that your potatoes may want to slide off.
Yes.
It's a very, very simple technique. You can alternatively just turn them over. And it may actually be a little more stable on the other side. So as you can see now, this one is not going to slide as much as it did the first time. And it's actually very, very easy. As I mentioned, if you take your time to chop them right, you won't have your potatoes also sliding left, right, and center. Right, so I think we've done well so far.
So far, so good.
Would you be able to tell this was chopped by hand?
No.
Yeah.
I'd say you have a machine somewhere.
You'd actually think they were machine cut.
Yes.
So now that's one beautiful tip you've learned on the show today. So I'm just going to reserve those on the side, and I'm going to move this into a bowl. Now, also something I like to mention, especially when chopping fries, Very, very handy tip you can always use is wash your potatoes first and then proceed to slice. That way you don't actually lose the nutrient in your potato. So now for these particular ones, I don't need to actually throw them back in water. I can just let them sit on the side as we proceed to heat up our oil. Now I will of course need your assistance by grabbing a bit of that oil on the side, and you proceed to pour that into this nice big pot. So I'm going to be working with vegetable oil for this recipe. Right, simple as that. So we're going to turn that on very briefly and allow that to come to the heat. Right, so our first step of our masala fries is done. I'm just going to hold those at the back. And as we proceed, I'm also going to allow you to do a bit of some chopping now. But because I know you may not be a fan of chopping onions, I'll allow you to chop some tomatoes for us. But I'm also going to share a small tip with you on chopping your tomatoes. Grace, I also wanted to find out what particular technique do you use in chopping your tomatoes? How would you begin, for instance?
Slice and dice.
Slice and dice.
Yeah.
Now I want you to just grab this knife.
Okay.
And I'll actually allow you to slice the first one because I also want to get an idea of how you chop. Okay. Just to get an idea of how good you are with your knife.
Should I remove the eye?
Now, that is where I wanted to correct you. Now, one particular thing I've realized over a long period is, even in my career, I've actually realized a lot of guys go right across and get that slice off.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is you're actually wasting your tomato by doing so. Now, one particular tip I'll share with you, I'll let you try with the second one. So what I like to do is take a small knife and I just hold my thumb almost to the end of right next to the end of the tip of the knife. And what I do is I pierce it right next to the eye. And all I do now is just go right around the eye. And you see now what happens is you don't actually waste any of your tomato. You only take the eye out, which is what you don't need. Interesting, huh? That's another tip I could share. And as you can tell, because it's an eye that you're pretty much getting rid of, you don't actually waste that extra slice from your tomato. And it's also a very handy tip if you may be slicing tomatoes. There's a lot of guys who really go an extra step of losing that extra slice. Now this particular tip you can also be able to use in making sure that you always get 100% of your tomato. Interesting, yeah?
It's very nice to know.
Right, now I'm actually going to allow you to do the same thing for our second piece as we continue to slice this one. Right, just almost right through the inside and then you just go round. And what happens is you can also be able to use the same trick with onions. You know, every time when you chop onions, you always try and figure out how to get rid of that last bit. You can actually do the same with an onion, and it will actually allow you to chop all the way to the end.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
And you won't cry in the process.
And you will not cry in the process. Also another tip of getting your onions chopped very, very nice and simple. All right, now we're going to proceed to deseed our tomato. So I'm just going to do the first one and you'll proceed to do the same for me. So I'm going to actually take that out first because we are not actually going to be incorporating that part into our recipe. So all you're going to do is once you take the flesh out, you're just going to, let me move that off the way. You're just going to slice right through to the end and then just turn them to the side. And you're going to now chop them into very, very small cubes. And you'll just take your time and get it done very, very simply, no hurry. And as you can be able to see, it gives you a nice, beautiful appearance to your tomatoes as well, yeah?
Oh wow, then what happens to the...
Now what we can also be able to do with this, remember you can be able to throw this into sauces that you're making. You can also be able to just blend this and even have it just as a drink. So it's actually very nutritious to actually just throw this in your mouth, especially if you're working in the kitchen. There's particular instances where even as chefs, we tend to look for things to nibble on in the kitchen. And now because you're looking at something that will also give you a little bit of water retention in your system, you can easily just throw that in your mouth. It'll actually be very, very refreshing and it'll actually just clean your palate. So it's also a very good palate cleanser as you're cooking. You can actually be able to nibble from your ingredients as you cook.
Yeah.
Or you can alternatively just save those and maybe blend them, and you can actually throw that into a sauce or even a soup, or even make just simple tomato juice, which is also a very, very good addition to maybe an appetizer or even a drink that you may be having. Right, so I will allow you to continue to deseed our tomatoes, and while you do so, I'm going to proceed to add our fries into the oil. Now I like my I like my oil nice and hot. It actually allows for me to get the potatoes to cook right through to the center, and it actually also saves time. So like now what I just did is I literally allowed the oil to get to the almost to boiling point. As soon as the oil begins to smoke, I just turn the oil off completely. And it's also a very, very simple way of...
the oil?
No, yeah, I turn off the heat completely and allow the oil to just continue to cool down while the potatoes continue to cook.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's also a very simple tip of blanching your potatoes without having to worry about when will they come out.
Yeah.
So all you need to do once you do so, throw your potatoes in once the oil is smoking hot, and you can turn your burner off completely. And as soon as the bubbles settle, your potatoes are ready to come out.
Oh.
Yeah, simple as that. Because what happens is, remember the oil is really high when you begin. And what happens is as the oil continues to cool down, the potatoes absorb the heat. So what happens is as your oil continues to drop, your potatoes will actually be nice and crispy outside, and they're still going to be soft in the center. And you can also achieve the same by boiling almost boiling your potatoes in the oil.
Yeah.
That way you actually allow them to cook right through, because remember this will of course go straight into the sauce that you'll be making a little later. So that's also another tip that you can get to take home today. Right, so as we continue to blanch our potatoes, remember as you're making your chips masala, very important that you have your potatoes cooked a little bit in advance, just giving you a bit of time as well to proceed to prepare the rest of the ingredients for your sauce. And this, of course, will also allow you in saving time, especially if you're making this maybe for a very, very quick and easy maybe dinner meal, or even if you're probably just trying to save time while making a very, very quick lunch. Right, so I'm just going to lift this and show you what they look like at the moment. Now, as you can see, the tips are nice and brown at the end.
Yes.
One particular checkpoint for making sure that your potatoes have just started to blanch on the inside. So what happens is your potatoes will always color from the edges towards the center. And what happens is as soon as they start to color at the edges, you actually know it's almost time to take them out. If you're, of course, just blanching them and you don't want them to cook all the way. So we're just going to allow that to continue to boil down slowly. As you can see, the bubbles are just continuously reducing as we proceed. And while that continues, I'm just going to move you over to this side. And I'm just going to grab a plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those out very, very shortly. But as we do so, I'm just going to proceed to deseed the other piece of tomato that we had a little earlier. Now, I also wanted to find out, when you make your own fries at home, do you prefer to make your fries to order, or do you like to peel your potatoes in advance, soak them, and then leave them and come back to them?
I don't like cooking in a hurry, so I definitely like to peel and soak them before.
Okay.
But I feel like since you told me about the nutrients, I may not be the best option to leave them all soaked.
It's true, because what happens is there's that chemical in potatoes called niacin. And what happens is when you leave them in the water too long, it actually starts to dissolve into the water. And what happens is, remember, you're always going to pour the water out immediately, yeah?
Yes.
So what happens is you're actually pouring the sweetest part of the potato, which is that particular chemical. So this particular chemical is what actually turns black. If you notice when potatoes turn black when you leave them, when you peel and leave them out.
Yes.
So that is normally what happens. It starts to ooze out, and one particular checkpoint is actually the fact that it'll start to turn black on the outside. So that's basically your niacin actually seeping away. And that's what you're trying to avoid. So that tip I was sharing about washing them and then peeling and then chopping, always guarantees a better tasting bunch of fries every single time.
And nutritious, of course.
And nutritious, of course. All right, now our bubbles are down. Now you're going to proceed to take those off the heat. Be sure to give them a nice, beautiful shake. And you can just rest them on some parchment paper. And while you continue, I'm just going to finish chopping this up, which will of course take us to the next step of making our masala sauce. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be showing you a very, very simple tip of making a good masala fries without actually using ketchup. Remember, one particular thing with ketchup you will realize is it is a processed product. It contains a bit of preserves, which is not something you really want to get your kids or even yourself get used to, because what happens is we actually consider it a very, very poisonous substance as chefs. And I actually try and make my own ketchup every time I get a chance to. It's not actually very hard. We have actually done it in the recent past, so you can actually be able to find the recipe on our YouTube page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. Maybe you'll actually be able to make some ketchup with us in the show very soon, yeah?
Definitely.
All right, now as we proceed to finish chopping up our tomatoes, we're also going to be chopping up some onions, which we'll be incorporating to the recipe. Right, so once that's chopped up, I'm just going to move those into a bowl. And just set that aside. And as I mentioned, you can actually proceed to save the insides or the seeds of your tomatoes. Remember, you can also be able to just take this and throw them in your garden outside.
Okay.
You may actually be able to grow tomatoes in a month or two. So it's also another tip you can be able to use. All right, so as we continue, I'm just going to wipe that board very quickly. Right, now next up, we're also going to chop up a bit of our onion. But as I do so, you are going to also give me a little bit of a hand with our garlic. I'm also going to move this out of the way. So I'm just going to give you the 3 cloves of garlic, and we're also going to add just a bit of salt in there. Right, so as Grace proceeds to do so, I'm also going to proceed to chop up some of the onions, and we're also going to take a very, very short break. But when we do come back, I will of course take you to the next step of the process, which is making a very, very simple masala sauce, and we'll of course incorporate everything together, taking us to the last and final part of the show. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Hello viewers, and welcome back to the show. For those of you who are just tuning in, we're right about ready to start the next step of our very simple chips masala recipe. And now without further ado, Grace, you'll do us the honor by turning on the gas. Right, so we'll begin the process very simply by heating up a pan. And Grace, you'll do the honors by adding just a little bit of oil to the pan, about a teaspoon. So we're going to be working with olive oil for this recipe. Remember, as I said, we're all about eating healthy for this particular show. So very, very simply, as your oil continues to heat up, I will just begin by passing over some of the ingredients which you'll be adding in. And we're also going to grate up some of the fresh ginger root that we have. Now, Grace, I don't know if you're a big fan of working with olive oil.
I hear it's very healthy, but unfortunately not yet, because it's very difficult to find.
Well, it actually is a healthier option. It's actually among the purest oils available in the market. There are, of course, a little less costlier options that you can be able to find, like canola. So you can also find canola oil. And it's also got a very, very beautiful fragrance to it as opposed to vegetable oil that's very bland. Among many other different oils that I also use in the show are hazelnut oil or even cashew oils. So we've got quite a beautiful array of oils that you can be able to use. But the reason why I like olive oil is the fact that it also gives a bit of a flavor to it.
Yeah.
And as also just to add to what I mentioned, what happens is you may also not, actually most viewers may not be able to find it at their retail stores wherever they are.
Yeah.
But a very good alternative that I like to use at home, especially if I can't be able to find olive oil, is canola oil. So it's also very, very good, very low in cholesterol, and of course also a little bit on the same price range as vegetable oil.
And it's
Right,
available.
and it's available. Right, so as our pan gets to its hot point, we're going to begin by adding some onions. All right, so you can grab a spoon and you can just give that a mix. So we're going to start by cooking down our ingredients, beginning with our onions. Remember, it's also very important to sweat out your onions. It always gives it a nice, beautiful flavor.
Yeah.
And right about the point where you get to when your onions just start to brown,
Yeah.
proceed to add your tomatoes. And you can continue to mix that through. Be sure to also go right around the pan every time so that you can get to use the maximum heat that's on the pan. Right, so simple as that. And as you continue, I'm also going to chop up some of the coriander, which we're going to be incorporating to our recipe. Right, so to that, we're going to be adding about 2 tablespoons of some freshly chopped coriander leaves. Right, once those are chopped up. Right, so it's a very, very simple technique of building a sauce, basically allowing your tomatoes to break down. And I'm also going to be using a very different way of adding our aromatics, which is our garlic and ginger.
Okay.
So at this point, we're basically just allowing the tomatoes to begin to cook down. Remember, you also want this sauce to be able to coat your fries.
Yeah.
So just to aid in breaking this down a little quicker, we're going to add some lemon juice. And that may cause you to sneeze a little bit.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. And as you can tell, the flavor, you can actually start to depict the sweetness of the tomatoes as soon as the vinegar or the lemon juice goes in there.
Yeah.
And to that, I also like to use just the same size amount of lemon juice or vinegar to water. So I'm going to add this, almost double the amount of the vinegar. And you can proceed to mix that through. And basically, you may have instances, especially when trying to break down your tomatoes, especially if they're not overly ripe.
Yeah.
It may be hard for you to break the consistency down a little faster, so you can also add a little bit of lemon juice, or you can add little amounts of water, and that will also aid in breaking down your tomatoes. And as you proceed, we're also going to add some of our dry spices. So I'm going to begin by adding some cumin powder. You can just keep mixing. Then we're going to add about a 1/4 teaspoon of some paprika powder. And we'll also add a teaspoon of our onion powder. And what happens is at times you will actually realize it may take longer, especially if your tomatoes are not overly ripe. So I will also mention, if you're looking for very, very good homemade masala sauce, you can alternatively go with overripe tomatoes.
Okay.
And that will, of course, not call for you to add any more water to the mixture. Right, so we're just going to add a little more water to that. As you can see, it's still very chunky.
Yes.
And now also to mention, very important to also regulate your temperature as you proceed to cook down a sauce. Remember, another thing is if your pan is too hot or if your heat is too high, it may actually burn the mixture and change the taste.
Yes.
So I always like to work between the lowest temperature that you can easily be able to gauge by turning it all the way to the bottom and going up by about 1 centimeter. So as you can see, that's right between low and medium.
Yes.
And that's a very good particular stage to be on, especially when cooking down the sauce. Right, so as that continues, as I mentioned, I'm going to be adding my aromatics a little later in the process. So to that, we're going to add a heaped teaspoon of some garlic, minced. And we're also going to add our minced ginger. And all you're going to do now is proceed to cook that down right up until it's almost starting to be almost like a thick gravy. And as I said, it may also not have that much heat from the paprika, but since you mentioned you like a little bit of heat, we are also going to be incorporating a bit of some chili. Now, do you like, what would you measure your heat level, especially with food? Would you say it's on the medium, on the high, or on the low end?
I'd say on the medium.
On the medium.
Yes, definitely.
So now to achieve that, you can easily be able to achieve so by slicing your chili right through the middle. Remember also to mention the hottest part of the chili is the seeds. And if you're looking at that beautiful medium, you can of course proceed by removing your seeds first. So once you slice your chili into half, proceed to just open it up, and using the back of your knife, just proceed to slide that through, and that will be able to get rid of your seeds really quickly. And proceed to do the same for the second piece. Also very important to always discard your seeds just to make sure you don't actually accidentally add them to the food. And also very importantly, rinse your knife just to make sure that you're on the safe side. All right, and to that we're pretty much just going to chop up our green chili. And we'll proceed to add that to the mixture. And as you can see, the tomatoes are just starting to almost stick to the sides of your pan. This will of course call for the last bit of addition of some water. And this will basically allow you to reconstitute the mixture right to the center. There we go. And right after you've added your bit of water, you'll proceed to add your potatoes. And now you'll be just proceed to mix very, very gently, making sure, of course, to always not to try and break your fries. Remember, mixing very vigorously will, of course, break your potatoes, and you'll end up with a potato mixture as opposed to masala fries. Right, and as that continues, we're also going to finish off the very simple recipe by adding some chopped coriander. Looks very good, yeah, and of course you also get a very different appeal to it as opposed to adding ketchup, which will of course make it extremely saucy and sweet. Okay. Yep. And how's the aroma coming? How's the aroma? Is it different from what you're used to?
It's definitely is.
And it actually feels more like a hearty meal as opposed to adding ketchup, yeah?
Yes.
All right, now once your fries are completely coated, you can proceed to turn off the heat. And pakaju. Right, simple as that. And now we are basically just going to proceed to move our meal onto the plate. So Grace, you can proceed to just scoop that onto the plate. I'll just hold it for you. There we go.
That's enough.
Now keep going, keep going. So basically the portion we made should actually be a good sizable portion for at least a side, especially if you're going to be having this with maybe some meat or a salad on the side. There we go, simple as that. And you can just leave that at the top. All right, so simple as that. Now to finish that off, very important to always remember to season. So just a little bit of salt over the top. And I also particularly like to give it a bit of an aroma before you're done plating. Okay. So I'm just going to sprinkle as well a bit of some onion powder. And that, Grace, is as easy as it is.
Looks very beautiful.
Looks very different, yeah?
Yes.
And then another thing I also want you to do is, of course, give it a taste. So you can grab the fork on the side, just give it a taste, and let me know what you think of a difference of not working with ketchup.
very natural.
Exactly.
There's a lot of flavor going on.
Uh-huh.
It's definitely a better option.
Definitely a better option.
Yes.
So viewers, there you have it. I think from a foodie's perspective, she has confirmed that it is actually possible to achieve a very, very good and simple chips masala without, of course, the addition of preserves or any particular processed items. And that, of course, brings us to the very, very end of the show. And I will, of course, remind you that you can, of course, be able to air some of your comments, your queries, or even the suggestions through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And if you, of course, missed out on the episode today and you, of course, want to recap on this, you can, of course, also subscribe to our YouTube page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And you can be able to catch up on this and many more episodes that you may have missed out on. But we have come to the end of the show. I will, of course, bid you farewell. And until the next episode, from me and Grace, it's a bye-bye and see you soon.